Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in today. This is the Bodega Cat Book Club Spiritual Edition. And today we're continuing our reading of a book in which the title I'm not going to read out loud because I might get into trouble with YouTube. But I will say this. The title of the book corresponds to a specific letter in the English alphabet. And if you take simple gematria, which is numerology, where A equals 1, B equals 2, C equals 3, so on and so forth, until Z or Z equals 26. The title of the book corresponds to the 17th letter of the alphabet. Now, in the chapter for this particular book, as I'm reading the chapter, I will not say the alphabet, but I will say the numerical equivalent of it. So, anyways, that's just a little foreshadow there. But I'll read the rest of the subtitle of the book, though, or the title of the book. It's called The Earliest Gospel: An Introduction to the Original Stories and Sayings of Jesus. Sorry about the glare over there. Okay. And the author is John S. Kloppenborg. So this particular book was inspired by spirit, if you want to call it that, or universe. And I was asking for guidance in terms of what book to read next. And I was asking for a sign, and I got it. So, a very interesting backstory. I won't get into that here. If you guys are interested in finding out more about it, or about the backstory, I'll leave a link. I talked about it in the introduction video. So I will leave a link in the description box below if you guys want to check it out, if you're curious about it. So that's where the inspiration comes from. So, and I've learned in my spiritual journey that, when your higher soul or when the divine creator says to do something, yeah, I do it. You can argue. It's okay to argue. It's okay to, you know, fight back and push back, but at the end, it's probably better for your own soul, for your own peace of mind that you do it. So, and that's what we're here for. We are vessels and instruments of the divine. The divine has a plan, and the plan includes us if we say yes. So, anyways, that's my little story there. So, what am I going to say here? Before we begin, I want to thank you everybody for being here and welcome everybody for being here. If you do like these formats, if you like to read, if you like our book clubs, please do check out, consider checking out our other book clubs. We have our health book clubs on Wednesdays and then financial book clubs on Thursdays. And we put all the books that we've read, all our episodes on YouTube in a playlist. So you guys can just either download it or just hit play, when you're walking your dog or stuck in traffic or going to work or whatever it is that you do. Um, and we have other content on there as well on YouTube. So not just the book clubs. So please do check it out, like and subscribe and comment and all that good stuff. If you have a book that you would like the book club to read or like to recommend the book club to read, I will leave a link in the description box below. You guys could fill that out. And we love to know what's in your library. We love to know which books have changed your life, which books have inspired you, and we love to share that with the world. I think that reading is a lost art, and I wanted to contribute to that a little revival in my little neck of the wood. So, anyways, I will do that, leave that link below. And if you are please do subscribe and check out and subscribe out to our free monthly newsletter that we put out. And if you want to support us further, you can buy me a coffee, leave a donation, or check out our merch. We have many different merchandises for your fur babies, for your kitties and doggies, as well as for humans, for you. And we're regularly updating our designs and coming up with new designs every month. So come back to our shop section on our website. Come back often and check out our merch and support us that way. We appreciate it very much. And then lastly, if you're in the Los Angeles area or if you're visiting LA, please come visit us at our healing center. We have a healing center that we use technologies based on Nikola Tesla's scalar wave research for holistic healing for both domestic cats and dogs and humans. So you could read all about that technology and the benefits it provides, as well as some of the testimonials um, on our website, and uh, as well as our other services that we provide as well. So which whatever way, shape, or form that you guys support us, we appreciate it very, very much. But most importantly, thank you for you for being here and for sticking with us through all these books that we have read and are continuing to read, and joining our community that way, or supporting our community that way. Okay, so this episode is chapter 3, and this will be part 3. Now, for this book, sometimes the author might have endnotes. I won't read the endnotes at the back of the book, but I will mention it if I come across it in the main chapter. So that's how we're going to do it here. Now, if you have a book, you could follow with us there. I'm just going to move the camera in a little bit here. If you have a book, you could follow with us there. If not, you can follow with us here on camera. If not, you can just listen. So whatever works for you. There is not one way to do things. There's multitude of ways to get to the same destination, right? Okay, so here we go. Is Jesus raised? The notion of the resurrection of Jesus is so ubiquitous in early Christian literature that it is hard to imagine any writer either ignoring it or having a different view. The resurrection of Jesus is fundamental to Paul's thinking, for he views it as a cosmic event and a paradigmatic event in which the believer may participate through faith. Without the resurrection, there would be no Pauline theology. Predictions of Jesus' resurrection are also integral to the fabric of Mark's gospel, as in Mark chapter 8, verse 31, chapter 9, verse 31, chapter 10, verse 32 to 34, chapter 14, verse 28, and chapter 16, verse 7. And these predictions are developed into full-scale resurrection appearances, full-scale resurrection appearance stories in Matthew and Luke. The concept of resurrection derives from the conviction among many Judeans that the human person was not divisible into an immortal soul. An immortal body was, um, let me read that again. The concept of resurrection derives from the conviction among many Judeans that the human person was not divisible into an immortal soul and immortal body, but was a single unified being. This implied that if there was to be any continuation of human existence after death, it would necessarily involve a body. What? I got to read that again. Continuation of human existence after death, it would necessarily. Yes and no, depending on which dimension you're talking about. Oh, okay. Sorry, I'm talking to myself there. It just sounds a little strange, that's all to me. Okay. Uh, Continuing. Even the final judgment required resurrection. Here's a quote, and many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. Those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the sky, and those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. This is Daniel chapter 12, verse 2 to 3, end quote. Even Paul, who shows the influence of Greek ideas, was still committed to the idea of a resurrection body, though he insisted that the resurrection body was a, quote, spiritual body. 1 Corinthians 15. The sayings of Gospel 17 also invokes the idea of resurrection in several texts, but it is not Jesus' resurrection that is in focus. In 17, chapter 7, verse 22, one of the indications that the one to come is here is the raising of the dead. I don't know if you could take that literally. Um, but anyways, who am I, right? I don't know nothing. Okay. Uh, where am I here? Sorry about that. Just got a little squirrel and lost my place. Okay, so here's a quote from the book, the Gospel 17. So, quote, go report to John what you hear and see. The blind regain their sight, and the lame walk around. The skin diseased are cleansed, and the deaf hear. The dead are raised. I think that's Greek. Nekroi igorotai. No, sorry, butchered that word. And the poor are given good news. That is, end quote. That's 17, chapter 7, verse 22. This is, in fact, a what? What kind of a word is that? Pastiche? Sounds like French. The first time I've seen that word. This is, in fact, a pastiche of quotations from Isaiah, which look forward to a time of redemption. And there's an endnote for that if you guys want to do a deeper dive to it. A similar pastiche appears in a fragmentary text from Qumran, which also connects resurrection with the end times. And here's a quote. Quote, the heavens and the earth will listen to his Messiah, and none therein will stray from the commandments of the holy ones. Seekers of the Lord, strengthen yourselves in his service. All you hopeful in your heart, will you not find the Lord in this? For the Lord will consider the pious Hesidim, and call the righteous by name. Over the poor his spirit will hover, and will renew the faithful with his power. And he will glorify the pious on the throne of the eternal kingdom. He who liberates the captives, restores sight to the blind, strengthens the bent, and forever I will cleave to the hopeful, and in his mercy, and the fruit will not be delayed for anyone. And the Lord will accomplish glorious things which have never been as he, for he will heal the wounded and make the dead to live and bring good news to the poor. He will lead the uprooted and knowledge and smoke. There's a question mark about that. I'm not quite sure what that means. There's an end quote to that. So there's four, uh, the letter 17 and 521. It must be a code or something. I don't know what that means. Okay. Continuing, it is not clear whether these deeds are supposed to be deeds of the Messiah or actions of God connected with the appearance of the Messiah. But neither is it clear that whether 17, chapter 7, verse 22 describes Jesus's deeds or deeds that surround the appearance of the one to come. In either case, however, for alphabet 17, 521, and 17, chapter 7, verse 22, connect the healing of the blind and lame, raising of the dead, and bringing good news to the poor with the advent of the messianic age. Neither text, however, suggests that the Messiah or the one to come will himself rise from the dead. Resurrection also appears in 17 at 17 chapter 11 verse 31 to 32 in Jesus's retort to those seeking a sign. The queen of the south will be raised, Igurthistai, at the judgment with this generation and condemn it. For she came from the ends of the earth to listen to the wisdom of Solomon. And look, something more than Solomon is here. Ninevite men will arise, anestesontai, at the judgment with this generation and condemn it. For they repented at the preaching of Jonah, and look, something more than Jonah is here. 17 here reflects the widespread belief in Second Temple Judaism that a general resurrection will precede God's judgment, e.g., Daniel chapter 12, verse 2 to 3. Again, it is not Jesus' resurrection that is at issue, but the resurrection of two Gentile witnesses against this generation. If 17 was well aware of the concept of resurrection, why is there no hint of it in connection with the fate of Jesus? As I have argued above, the 17 people regarded death as intrinsic to Jesus' identity as their model and ideal. Is it possible that they simply believed that Jesus, like the prophets killed before him, would have to await the general resurrection for vindication? But this would imply that the 17 folk were sufficiently cut off from other early streams of the Jesus movement that they had not heard of the tales of the empty tomb or the appearances of Jesus to his followers. This scenario is indeed difficult to imagine. Why then, if 17 was well aware of the concept of resurrection, did it not extend this to Jesus? The answer may lie in the possibility recently defended by Daniel Smith, and there's an endnote about that, that in order to understand Jesus's post-mortem vindications, 17 did not use the metaphor of resurrection, the revivification of a corpse, but the metaphor of assumption, that the taking up of the righteous. Like the concept of resurrection, the notion of assumption also depends on a belief in the unity of the human person. If a person is to be caught up to heaven, it cannot merely be the soul or mind. It must involve the entire person. In the Bible, both Elijah and Enoch were said to have been removed to heaven prior to their natural deaths. The terminology most commonly associated with the assumption of a figure has to do with being, quote, removed from sight, end quote. He disappears, no longer appears, and no longer is seen. There is an endnote about that. As 2 Kings chapter 2 verse 12 states, Elisha, quote, no longer saw Elijah. Kai ok Eden auton eti. The motive, end quote. The motive of non-appearance is attested earlier. Oh, sorry. In the description of Enoch's disappearance in Genesis chapter 5, verse 24. Quote, Enoch was pleasing to God, and he was not found, for God removed him, end quote. In the account in 1 Enoch, or 1 Enoch, chapter 12, verse 1, the writer says, quote, and none of the people knew where he had been taken, and where he is, or what became of him, end quote. The wisdom of Solomon employs the same idea to describe God's deliverance of the just man from persecution. Quote, there was one who pleased God and was loved by him, and while living among sinners, he was taken up. He was caught, herpagi, sorry, butchered that word, up lest evil change his understanding or deceit deceive his soul. End quote. That's from Wisdom, chapter 4, verse 10 to 11. Seen in this context, Jesus' statement in 17, chapter 13, verse 35, that the Jerusalemites will no longer see me, aume aidete me, recalls the description of Elijah's or Enoch's departure. He will no longer be seen because God removed him, whether before or after death. But 17 also looks forward to a future role for Jesus. Quote, I tell you, you will not see me until the time comes when you say, blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. That's 17, chapter 13, verse 35. The premature disappearance of holy persons encouraged the expectation that they had been taken away because they had yet a future role to play. God was holding them in reserve. Hence, the widespread belief that Elijah would return to play a role in the restoration or judgment of Israel. That's Malachi chapter 4, verse 5 and 6. I don't know what sir means. I don't know which book is that. If anybody knows, put it in the comments below. I'd be very interested to know because I don't remember that in the Old Testament. Not that I know my Bible very well. No. Okay. Anyways, that's from chapter 48, verse 10. Enoch was also expected to play a role in the future as Son of Man. First Enoch chapter, is that chapter 70 and 71, maybe? Oh, could be, yeah. And both Baruch and Ezra were said to have been assumed to await some eschatological function. And there is an endnote about that. The just man of the wisdom of Solomon likewise appears in the final judgment to confound his erstwhile persecutors. That's from Wisdom, chapter 5, verse 1 to 8. Dieter Zeller noted how congenial the notion of God's rescue of an envoy was with the Deuteronomistic view of the prophets. By means of assumption, God both preserved the just from contamination. I think Wisdom chapter 4, verse 11 and 2 BAR. I don't know what that book is. Anyways, if anybody knows, put it down in the comment below. Anyways, that's from chapter 48, I guess, verse 29 to 30, and spared them from the coming eschatological catastrophe. That's 4 Ezra, chapter 14, verse 15. I guess that's how you say it. I guess these are books that are not from the Bible. These are probably the Qumran books, right? So anyways, continuing, assumption and the Deuteronomistic view of the prophets are found combined in Enoch's animal apocalypse for 1 Enoch 85 to 90, where Elijah's assumption is made the direct result of the persecution of the prophets. And there is an endnote for that. If it is correct that 17, chapter 13, verse 35 invokes the concept of assumption rather than resurrection, we can suggest that the 17 people regarded Jesus' death as the death of a just man or a prophet whom God had taken up, pending some future eschatological function. This accounts for the fact that 17 accords Jesus' death no special salvific significance, but jumps immediately to Jesus' return as the one who is to come. Chapter 1, verse 49 to 51, and chapter 13, verse 34 to 35. In the parallel text from Second Temple Judaism, it was not the death of the sage that was salvific, but rather the figure's expected eschatological role that was important. Again, we should observe that when 17 was incorporated into Matthew and Luke, this view of Jesus' vindication was completely obscured. Matthew and Luke employ the concept of resurrection and underscore this with stories of the appearance of the risen Jesus. If it were not for 17, we might assume that resurrection was the only metaphor that was used by the early Jesus movement to articulate the idea of Jesus' post-mortem vindication. But if 17 employed assumption theology, we might also read Mark's story of the discovery of the empty tomb in a different light. Mark famously has no resurrection appearance stories, only the discovery of an empty tomb. The motif of the disappearance of a body is closely connected with assumption theology. And there's an endnote about that. It was only when Mark edited the empty tomb story that he had taken from earlier tradition and incorporated into his gospel, framed with predictions of death and resurrection, chapter 8, verse 31, chapter 9, verse 31, chapter 10, verse 32 and 34, that the empty tomb story was transformed from a story of death and disappearance into a story of death and implied resurrection. We must admit that this speculation about 17's view of Jesus' vindication is based on the slenderest of evidence, half a sentence in 17, chapter 13, verse 35. Yet, what is in 17 fits what we know of assumption theology and makes sense of the fact that 17 does not treat Jesus' death as an expiatory sacrifice or special saving event, as do Matthew and Paul. 17 again provides a different perspective on one of the central beliefs of Christianity. Resurrection was not the only metaphor available by which to imagine Jesus' post-mortem vindication. Okay, the kingdom and concrete ethics. Before discussing features of 17's ethical teaching, it is necessary to say a few words about religion in the ancient Mediterranean world. In the 21st century, we usually think of religion as a discrete and identifiable aspect of culture and distinguish it from economics, politics, education, and other cultural domains. Yet, in ancient Mediterranean languages, there is no word at all that is equivalent to our abstract term religion. There are words for altars, sacrifices, prayers, and temples, and words for attitudes toward the gods, like piety, impiety, fear. But there was no collective word that gathers all of these into a single domain, distinguishable from the family, the city, the empire, the army, trade, and professional associations, and other social institutions. Religion in the ancient world was embedded in these institutions. Households honored their own patronal deities. Religious practices were embedded in family life. So also with businesses. Professional guilds of shippers were devoted to Poseidon. Woodcutters' guilds worshipped Silvanus. To be a citizen of Athens meant that one had Athena as a patronal deity. Civic notables strove to obtain political offices, but they also strove to have priesthoods. Cities sponsored sacrifices, built temples, and conducted festivals. The idea of the separation of church and state was unthinkable in the ancient world. The Emperor Augustus, after all, was Pontifex Maximus, the chief priest of the Roman cult. For much of history in the 2 centuries before the Common Era, the political ruler of Jewish Palestine was also the high priest of the Jewish cult. Even during the 1st century, when Judea was governed by a Roman prefect and Galilee by a Herodian prince, the priesthood in Jerusalem was an extremely potent political force. Conversely, the temple was not just a religious site, but the focal point for the collections of taxes or tithes that supported a priestly aristocracy, and hence an economic center and the focal point of economic redistribution in the form of loans and capital. And there is an endnote about all that history there. Festivals were not simply religious events, but were part and parcel of political, social, and economic life. Hanukkah and Passover were festivals of national liberation, which also explains, oh, sorry about that, which also explains why Passover time in Jerusalem was explosive politically. Jesus, it will be remembered, was executed as a messianic pretender by the Romans during Passover. The Feast of Sukkot, Tabernacles, was a harvest festival coordinated with the olive and grape harvests, and Shavuot weeks was coordinated with wheat harvest in the late spring. An index of the political importance of the cult is that the Romans, who controlled Judea, kept custody of the high priest's garments and allowed them to use them only under their supervision. Cultic insignia and clothing were not simply fancy clothing for serving God. They carried with them social and political power that could be mobilized against Roman interests. If religion was embedded in daily life, it functioned in the politics of the state quite differently from the religion embedded in the daily life of villagers and townsfolk. Douglas Oakman describes the difference thus, quote, religion, politics, and economics embedded within elite interests can be predicted to serve organization and legitimization of a social system to benefit those elites. Order is the primary social goal and value. Religion is shaped significantly in the direction of what Weber called a, quote, theodicy of good fortune, end quote, a justification of the status of the elite group. Order is seen as rooted in a natural or cosmic pattern and expressed in impersonal arrangements of political economy. Non-elite interests, including both declassed elites and non-elites, embedded within elite religion, politics, and economics, will either adapt to suffering through religion, Weber's theodicy of suffering, or attempt to access collective representations without elite authorization in order to resist and even overthrow that order. Finding meaning in suffering and seeking a reordering are primary social goals and values. Reordering is legitimated through an appeal to a higher religious order. Through an appeal to a higher religious court and carried through a familistic or quasi-familistic arrangements, end quote. And there is an endnote about that. Another way to describe the difference between the religion of the elite and that of the non-elite borrows Robert Redfield's distinction between great and little traditions. The great traditions are the learned syntheses and theologies cultivated in palace schools, temples, and among the elite. Naturally, the great traditions is formulated to sustain the economic and political interests of the elite. The little tradition represents the largely unreflective, untheologized beliefs and practices of the non-elite, found at the level of the village and town. And there's an endnote about that. There are both continuities and tensions between the great and little tradition. In terms of content, there is usually a considerable overlap between the great and the little tradition. The little tradition is normally dependent upon the great tradition. The synthesis of the great tradition furnish the lexicon of beliefs for the little tradition. But there is a difference in articulation. The abstract beliefs of the great tradition are usually rendered in a much more concrete form in the little tradition and are mixed with local beliefs and practices. The abstract belief in God's providence might appear at the village level as the expectation of a good harvest this year or the birth of a son. Success in the harvest or in childbirth could also be linked to devotion to a local saint, or drinking from the right well, or making the right incantations. As James Scott points out, peasants often emulate the orthodoxies of previous generations of the great tradition, from which the current ruling elite have already moved on. And there's an endnote about that. Hence, the elite frequently regard the little tradition as quaint, unschooled, and contaminated with unorthodox beliefs and practices. Another word for it is superstition, I guess, huh? All right. Continuing, although there is a strong correlation between the great and little tradition, there are also tensions. The abstract belief that God has given the land to Israel, a frequent refrain in Deuteronomy, also translates into resentment among the non-elite over the fact that land is very evenly distributed and the tax burden falls disproportionately on them. The little tradition is not merely a passive receptacle for the great tradition, but injects its own interests and reconfigures the great tradition in accordance with the basic needs of survival. The great tradition, however, is also often able to mystify certain aspects of itself, such that the peasant is convinced that not only the elite have certain key powers or access to the divine. Pilgrimage illustrates this dynamic, for the non-elite must travel to a holy site controlled by elites: Jerusalem for Judeans, Mecca for Muslims, Delphi or Dodona for Greeks, Praia, Allahabad or Varanasi for Hindus. Priests too are accorded special powers of access. The Judean high priest alone was able to make atonement on Yom Kippur. In India, Brahmins, who are at the top of the caste system, have the exclusive right to perform certain rituals. Yet the elites do not hold all of the power. While the elite may believe that they rule by divine right and consider the benefactions they give to the non-elite as their privilege to provide or to withhold, the non-elite often have a different view. The benefactions of the elite are often thought of as the rights of the non-elite. Non-performance of the elite's obligations toward the non-elite can, therefore, lead to tension and resistance. Non-elite may devise ways to resist the extractions of elite by foot dragging, tampering with weights and measures, hiding produce, and underpayment of taxes. A scene from the 1978 Italian movie L'Alberto degli Zoccoli, The Tree of the Wooden Clogs, shows tenant farmers loading their grain wagon with stones to increase its weight so that they would appear to pay the full amount of the rent to their landlord. In extreme circumstances, more drastic measures might be taken. Josephus reports that one of the first actions of the first revolt was the destruction of debt archives in Jerusalem, an indication that high debt burdens were one of the causes of the revolt. And there's an endnote about that. Boy, not much has changed, hasn't it? We're still seeing that play out today. Wow. Humans never learn. Okay, sorry about that. Got a little squirrel there. Let us continue here. Thus, although the little tradition is dependent on the great tradition, it is also in tension with the perspective of the elite. Scott describes the little tradition as, quote, a shadow society, a pattern of structural, stylistic, and normative opposition to the political religious tradition of ruling elites, end quote. And there's an end note about that. I have suggested earlier in this chapter that unlike the audiences presupposed by Matthew and Luke, and unlike those of the letters of Paul, the Jesus movement reflected in 17 was a rural phenomenon. 17 is replete with agricultural and rural metaphors, unproductive olive or fig trees being uprooted and burned. Chapter 3, verse 9, threshing and collecting wheat and burning the chaff. Chapter 3, verse 17, the requisitioning of laborers or farm animals by the military. 17, Gospel of 17, as well as Matthew, chapter 5, verse 41, the practice of measuring back agricultural loans by the same scoop used to make the loan, chapter 6, verse 38. Arboriculture, chapter 6, verse 43 to 44. House building in waters where flash floods can destroy the house, chapter 6, verse 47 to 49. Day laborers employed for the harvest, chapter 10, verse 2. The payment of day laborers, chapter 10, verse 7. Sowing and harvesting, chapter 12, verse 24. Burning grass in a furnace, chapter 12, verse 28. Litigants traveling to the town for court, chapter 12, verse 58 to 59. The rapid growth of mustard, chapter 13, verse 18 and 19, and chapter 17, verse 6. Shepherding, chapter 15, verse 4 to 7, and fieldwork, chapter 17, verse 34. For such a constituency, we should expect that the religion of Israel was expressed concretely and oriented to the demands of daily life, subsistence, reproduction, managing relations at the village level, and defending villagers against the predations of the outside, taxes, rents, and debt. 17, indeed, exemplifies just such concerns. Wow. Okay, we will stop here for now. Interesting section. Let me know what you think. I usually say this in my videos and in the beginning, but I forgot to say it. It is my opinion that God is meant to be experienced. It's meant to be transformative. It's meant to be life-changing. So the I think it's we do need some theosophizing and philosophizing of, some sort of understanding, I guess, of the Gospels and a lot of the quote unquote religious texts and things of that nature. But for me, I won't put too much emphasis on that because I don't think that our little puny little minds can understand uh, the vastness of the divine, or even in the spiritual world, right? The non-physical world. Anyways, I hope I'm making sense. But that's my opinion. That's not to say that studying it is not valuable. There has to be a balance, but I think for me, more emphasis is on the experiential part. So, anyways, that's my little 2 cents. And I hope you enjoyed that. Let me know what your thoughts are. And we will see you next time in our next book club. Okay, bye now.